Is Russia really winning in Ukraine? It's a fair question, and one that deserves more than propaganda, slogans, or echo chambers. Let's cut through the noise and look at the facts, because the facts tell a very different story. Since November 2023, Russia has suffered more than 615,000 casualties on the battlefield. That's not a typo. That's over 500,000 lives lost, wounded, or rendered combat ineffective. And if that weren't staggering enough, another 50,000 have deserted. Imagine the scale. That's more than the population of many European cities simply gone from the ranks. And for all that sacrifice, Russia has gained a sliver of land, a narrow strip of farmland smaller than Los Angeles County in California. To hold that tiny piece of territory, Russia has lost over 3,600 main battle tanks, more than the total tank inventory of all NATO countries in Europe combined. Every single day, roughly 1,500 soldiers are being thrown into the grinder to defend gains that can barely be seen on a map. But this isn't just a military disaster. It's an economic, demographic, and political catastrophe unfolding in real time. Back home, inflation is quietly suffocating the Russian economy. The central bank insists it's around 11%, but independent analysts estimate it's closer to 27%, a level that crushes savings, destroys purchasing power, and punishes the poorest most. The interest rate? A staggering 21%, the highest in over 2 decades. Millions of Russians are watching their financial futures dissolve. More than 1 million have already fled the country. Some fled to avoid conscription, others to escape political persecution, but most simply left because they no longer believed they had a future there. And where is the money going? Roughly 40% of Russia's federal budget is now devoted to war and domestic repression. Not to education, not to healthcare, not to fixing roads, building homes, or supporting families. Russia isn't investing in its people, it's bleeding them dry to prop up a fantasy of empire. This is not the posture of a victorious superpower. It is the slow-motion implosion of a regime that has traded truth for myth and stability for delusion. Since February 2022, Russia has actually lost territory. The grand invasion, sold to the Russian public as a swift liberation, has become a costly and humiliating retreat. What began as a war of conquest has devolved into a grinding war of attrition that Russia cannot win and cannot afford. And the moral cost? Perhaps even greater. Andrei Sakharov, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate and Soviet dissident, once warned that a state that does not respect the rights of its own people cannot be trusted to respect the rights of its neighbors. That quote feels almost prophetic now, because Vladimir Putin's Russia is not just a threat to Ukraine or to Europe. It is a danger to itself. In a tragic twist of irony, the man who claimed he was protecting Russian speakers has become their greatest killer. In the 21st century, no one, not NATO, not Ukraine, has killed or maimed more Russian speakers than Putin. In fact, in all of Russian history, only Joseph Stalin has harmed more Russian-speaking lives. And still, the war machine grinds on. In 2024, Russia spent $149 billion on its military, a 38% increase from the year before. That's 7.1% of its GDP, the highest level of military spending since 1979, during the Soviet war in Afghanistan. History gives us a clear warning here. No regime has sustained that level of militarization for long. Whether it was Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, or Milosevic's Serbia, over-militarization eventually breaks the spine of the state. Today, over a third of Russia's industrial output is war-related. And yet, much of the war economy is smoke and mirrors. According to a 2023 report from the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, 70% of Russian military tech remains dependent on imported parts, despite Putin's constant talk of strategic independence. Let's take drones, for example. Russia's Shahed drones are actually Iranian-designed. While Moscow claims to produce around 100 a month, 82% of the components are foreign. And their performance? Between March and May 2025, nearly 8,000 drones were launched, yet only 12.5% hit their intended targets. Many were taken down not by cutting-edge Western defenses, but by Cold War-era Soviet anti-aircraft guns. Each drone costs about $50,000 and on average lasts just 15 minutes in flight. This isn't cutting-edge warfare. This is throwing money into the furnace for the illusion of progress. And that illusion, that's where the regime's greatest weakness lies. Because Putin's biggest vulnerability is not external, it's psychological. The regime doesn't just manufacture lies for the public, it consumes those lies itself. Over time, the state becomes trapped in its own myth-making. Decisions are made in a feedback loop of fear, delusion, and sycophancy. As Czech dissident Václav Havel once said, "The lie becomes the pillar of the system, until even its authors live inside it." And the clearest crack in that illusion appeared on June 23, 2023. That was the day Yevgeny Prigozhin and 25,000 Wagner mercenaries seized the city of Rostov-on-Don and began a march toward Moscow. They downed aircraft, took control of military facilities, and came within 200 kilometers of the capital. What did the Russian government do? Nothing. No airstrikes, no firefights, no arrests. Commanders met with Prigozhin in the streets, drank coffee with him, and asked him nicely to stop. Why? Because nobody was sure he wouldn't win. And when the power structure is built on fear, no one wants to cross the man who might be your new boss tomorrow. That moment was historic, not just because it was a mutiny, but because it was the collapse of fear. For the first time in decades, the curtain was pulled back. The regime wasn't invincible. No one, not the National Guard, not the military, not the police, was willing to die for it. Prigozhin, in his final months, had said aloud what many were whispering, that the Kremlin treated its soldiers like meat, that the senior leadership was incompetent, corrupt, and morally bankrupt. And while he didn't name Putin directly, everyone knew who he meant. This is what Soviet defector Yuri Bezmenov once described as moral implosion. He warned that regimes built on deception and repression don't fall from war, but from within when no one believes anymore. And that's exactly what we're seeing. In just the past few weeks, over 2 million Russians, about 7% of the workforce, have defaulted on credit card debt. Apartment prices near Ukraine, especially in Belgorod, have dropped by 32%. People no longer trust that the state can protect its own territory. The birth rate, despite years of government programs to boost it, has dropped another 13% since the war began. These are not normal fluctuations. These are symptoms of a nation in terminal decline. Putin has been in power for nearly 25 years, and in that time he didn't build a country. He built a kleptocracy. He robbed Russia of its wealth, gutted its institutions, and destroyed any sense of national renewal. Like many autocrats before him, he believed fear could replace legitimacy. But there's one thing even the most brutal regimes cannot control forever. You can ban books. You can jail reporters. You can carpet bomb cities. But you cannot arrest inflation. You cannot torture your way to economic growth. No matter how many you kill, you cannot bomb your way into history's good graces. Putin's regime was never designed to win. It was designed to survive. But now it's doing neither. And the truth is unavoidable. This regime will not retire peacefully. It will end. And it will end in crisis, from within, collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, its own myths, and its own lies. If you want to understand how the Putin regime was built, why it was doomed from the start, and what comes next, subscribe. Because in the days ahead, we'll go deeper. And together, we'll watch history unfold. Thanks for watching. And thank you for standing with the truth and with Ukraine.